I'm Abigail, but everyone calls me Abby. I'm 28 years old now, but 2 years ago, my entire world shattered when my own father created a Facebook poll asking our family if I should be erased from it. Imagine scrolling through social media and seeing your dad publicly asking relatives if you deserve to be part of the family. The options? Yes, she's abandoned family values, or give her one more chance. That moment changed everything. Despite therapy and building my own life, nothing prepared me for that betrayal. Looking back now, I see it was just the final act in a lifetime of subtle rejection. Before I dive into this painful story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit subscribe, and stay with me, because what happened next shocked even my closest friends. Growing up in Lexington, just outside Boston, my childhood looked perfect from the outside. Our two-story colonial with its manicured lawn and holiday decorations made us look like the ideal American family. My father, Robert, built a successful financial consulting firm and made sure everyone knew it. My mother, Diane, quit her teaching job when I was born to become the perfect housewife, hosting dinner parties and joining the right committees. Then there was my brother Michael, 3 years younger, but somehow always the center of attention. We took the right vacations, wore the right clothes, and smiled in all the right family photos. But behind our front door, the dynamics were painfully clear. Michael was the golden child, and I was the other one. I remember the first time I truly felt this difference. I was 8 years old and had spent weeks working on a watercolor painting for the school art show. My teacher had selected it to represent our class, and I was so proud I could barely contain my excitement on the ride home. I burst through the door, artwork in hand, only to find my parents fawning over Michael's participation trophy from his Little League game. When I tried to show them my painting, my father glanced at it and said, "That's nice, Abby. Put it in your room." 2 days later, I found it in the recycling bin. That same month, Michael's trophy was placed on the mantle where it stayed for years. I tried everything to gain my father's approval. I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA throughout school. I joined debate club and won regional championships. I volunteered at the hospital on weekends. I became the model daughter, responsible, accomplished, and unfailingly polite. But nothing moved the needle. At family dinners, the conversation always centered around Michael's latest baseball game or school project, while my achievements warranted brief nods at best. My salvation during those years was my grandmother Grace, my mother's mom. She lived just 20 minutes away, and I would ride my bike to her house whenever I could. Unlike my parents, Grandma Grace celebrated my creative side. She bought me art supplies, hung my drawings on her refrigerator, and told me stories about her own mother, who had been an illustrator for children's books in the 1940s. "You have her gift," she'd tell me, examining my latest sketch. Never let anyone tell you that art isn't valuable. At home, our family dynamic was painfully predictable. Dad made decisions, Mom supported whatever he said, Michael benefited, and I adapted. My mother wasn't cruel, she just avoided conflict at all costs. Whenever I'd approach her about the unfair treatment, she'd say things like, "Your father just shows love differently," or "Michael needs more encouragement." I developed coping mechanisms. I journaled religiously, filling notebooks with my thoughts and sketches. I poured myself into my art, finding solace in creating worlds where I had control. And I built a fortress around myself with a few loyal friends, especially Jessica, who lived next door and witnessed enough of our family dynamics to understand my situation without me having to explain. The disparity reached its peak during my high school graduation. As valedictorian, I gave a speech that received a standing ovation. My father's only comment afterward was, "Not bad, but keep it humble." That same week, when Michael received a partial baseball scholarship to a state college, my parents threw a massive party, inviting extended family and neighborhood friends to celebrate. My acceptance to Rhode Island School of Design with a merit scholarship barely warranted a dinner out. That night, after everyone had gone home from Michael's party, I sat alone on our back porch and made a decision. Whatever approval I was seeking from my father, I would never receive it. It was time to stop trying. When my RISD acceptance letter arrived, I was ecstatic. One of the top art schools in the country had not only accepted me but offered me a substantial scholarship based on my portfolio. I dreamed of this moment, envisioning my parents' pride when I showed them the letter. Instead, my father frowned as he scanned the paper. Art school? I thought we discussed this, Abigail. There's no future in art. Business is where the opportunities are. We hadn't discussed it, he had declared it, and I had remained silent, knowing this moment would come. I've already been accepted to Northeastern's business program, he continued. I've got connections there. They'll set you up with internships. This art thing. He waved the RISD letter dismissively. It's a hobby, not a career. For once, I stood my ground. This isn't about what you want, Dad. This is my life, my talent, and I'm going to RISD. What followed was 3 weeks of Cold War in our house. My father's final ultimatum came the night before deposits were due. If you choose this art school fantasy over a practical education, don't expect us to pay for it. Not a dime. That night, my mother crept into my bedroom after Dad had gone to sleep. Maybe you should reconsider, she whispered. You know your father means well. He just wants security for you. Does Michael have to choose his major based on what Dad wants? I asked. Her silence was answer enough. The next morning, I submitted my enrollment deposit to RISD and applied for student loans. It was my first real act of independence, and despite the anxiety about debt, I felt a strange sense of freedom. Moving into my dorm that fall was bittersweet. My mother and Michael helped me unpack, while my father stayed in the car, checking emails on his phone. As they prepared to leave, Mom hugged me tight and slipped an envelope into my hand. Inside was $500 cash with a note. Don't tell your father. I believe in you. That first semester was transformative. Surrounded by other artists who valued expression and creativity, I finally felt like I belonged somewhere. My roommate, a photographer from Seattle, introduced me to her eclectic friend group, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to be perfect or achieve at all costs. I could simply be Abby. In my life drawing class, I met Daniel. Tall with perpetually paint-stained hands and a quiet confidence I found magnetic, he was studying illustration like me, but with a focus on graphic novels. After weeks of stolen glances and nervous conversations, he asked me out for coffee, which turned into dinner, which turned into us spending nearly every free moment together. Daniel came from a family of educators who celebrated creativity. When he talked about his parents, there was genuine affection in his voice, a concept so foreign to me I almost couldn't comprehend it. You'll have to meet them someday, he said one night as we walked back from the library. The thought terrified and excited me in equal measure. Family visits during that first year were strained at best. My mother came alone for Parents' Weekend, explaining that Dad was too busy with work. During my brief trip home for Christmas, my father barely acknowledged my presence, asking only about my grades and seeming disappointed when I couldn't translate my art school GPA into something he understood. When Thanksgiving break rolled around in my sophomore year, I made a bold decision. I invited Daniel to come home with me. Perhaps naively, I thought meeting someone so important to me might soften my father's stance. The disaster began almost immediately. Upon meeting Daniel, my father's first questions were about his family's financial situation and his backup plan if art didn't work out. During dinner, he interrogated Daniel about his career prospects, scoffing when Daniel explained his goal of working for a major animation studio. So you want to draw cartoons for a living, my father said. And they actually give degrees for that now. I watched Daniel maintain his composure, politely explaining the business side of animation and the growing market for graphic storytelling. My mother attempted to change the subject several times, while Michael, home from college himself, looked increasingly uncomfortable. The breaking point came when my father turned to me over dessert. And what about you, Abigail? Still convinced this art degree isn't a waste of money? I hope you're learning something practical like advertising. At least that's a real business. My illustrations were just selected for the student showcase, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And my professor submitted my work to a publishing workshop this summer. Publishing workshop, he echoed mockingly. Meanwhile, your brother's already lined up a paid internship with Anderson Consulting for next summer. That's what a useful degree gets you. Daniel reached for my hand under the table as I felt heat rising to my face. My degree isn't worthless, I said. I'm learning valuable skills and building a portfolio that will. Well, what? Get you a job drawing pretty pictures while you live in our basement? Is that your plan? My father's voice had risen to a near shout. Robert, my mother interjected weakly. Not now. No, Diane. She needs to hear this. This art school fantasy has gone on long enough. It's time she faced reality. I looked around the table, at my father's reddening face, my mother's downcast eyes, Michael's uncomfortable shifting, and Daniel, the only one meeting my gaze with unwavering support. We're leaving, I announced, standing up. Thank you for dinner, Mom. Don't be dramatic, Abigail, my father said. Sit down. No, I don't think I will. I grabbed my coat and Daniel's hand. And for the record, I'm doing really well at school. Not that you've ever bothered to ask. As Daniel and I drove back to campus that night, 3 days earlier than planned, I made another decision. I would limit my contact with my family, especially my father, to protect my mental health and creative growth. That spring, when I graduated with honors, my family's seats in the audience remained empty. I told myself it didn't matter as Daniel's parents cheered loudly enough for everyone, presenting me with a professional set of illustration pens and a tearful hug. It wasn't until months later that I discovered my first major betrayal. At a cousin's wedding, an aunt asked me why I'd dropped out of college. Confused, I explained that I'd graduated, with honors no less. But your father told everyone you couldn't handle the pressure and left school, she said, brow furrowed. He said you were working retail while you figured things out. The realization that my father had deliberately lied about my education and achievements to our extended family felt like a physical blow. He was so ashamed of my art degree that he'd rather pretend I was a college dropout than acknowledge my success in a field he didn't respect. New York City in August was brutally hot, especially in the 5th-floor walk-up I shared with Jessica in Brooklyn. After graduation, we'd both landed entry-level positions, her in publishing, me at a small design firm that primarily created corporate branding materials. The work wasn't particularly creative, but it paid, barely, enough to cover rent and my student loan payments. It's a foot in the door, I reminded myself each morning as I created yet another forgettable logo for yet another forgettable startup. My real work happened at night. After dinner, I would set up my drawing table by the window, turn on my desk lamp, and work on my illustrations until midnight or later. Building my portfolio piece by piece, I created the kind of whimsical, emotionally resonant work I actually wanted to make. Daniel had moved to New York too, landing a junior position at a gaming company in Manhattan. We spent weekends exploring the city's museums and art galleries, dreaming about seeing our own work displayed someday. We couldn't afford much, but those days were filled with a sense of possibility that made our tiny apartment and ramen dinners seem temporary, just stepping stones to something greater. Your technique has really evolved, Daniel said one night, looking through my latest illustrations. You should submit these to art directors. I bet you'd get freelance work. With Daniel's encouragement, I created a professional website and began cold emailing art directors at publishing houses. For months, I heard nothing. Then, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday, I received a response from a small but respected children's book publisher. We're looking for illustrators for a new fairy tale series. Your style would be perfect for one of the stories. Are you available for a paid test illustration? I read the email 5 times to make sure I wasn't dreaming. That test illustration led to my first professional contract. Illustrating a children's book about a little girl who could talk to trees. The advance wasn't much, but it was more than the symbol of validation. It was proof that my art had commercial value, exactly what my father had insisted it didn't. Contact with my family during this time was minimal. My mother called every few weeks, our conversations superficial and brief. She never asked about my art and seemed uncomfortable when I brought it up, quickly changing the subject to Michael's new job at a finance firm or neighborhood gossip from back home. I spoke to my brother occasionally, usually on holidays or birthdays. My father and I hadn't spoken directly since graduation. Then came Michael's wedding invitation. He was marrying Amanda, his college girlfriend, in what promised to be an extravagant affair at a historic Boston hotel. Despite my reservations, I decided to attend. Michael had always been caught in the middle of my conflict with our father, and I didn't want to punish him for our parents' behavior. Daniel accompanied me, providing much-needed moral support as we navigated the rehearsal dinner and pre-wedding events. My father acknowledged me with cool civility, while my mother fluttered around nervously, clearly worried about potential confrontation. The betrayal came during the reception. I had stepped away to use the restroom and was returning through a quiet hallway when I overheard my father's voice from a small sitting area around the corner. "Abigail's just going through a phase," he was saying to someone. "Living in New York, playing with her drawings. She'll come to her senses eventually and do something worthwhile. She's wasting her potential with this art nonsense." I stood frozen, heart pounding in my ears. After all this time, after proving I could support myself with my art, he was still dismissing my entire career as a childish phase. Without thinking, I rounded the corner. My father sat with two older relatives, drinks in hand. Their conversation halted abruptly when they saw me. "A phase?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm a professional illustrator with a book contract. I pay my own bills with my art. How is that a phase?" My father's face reddened. "Abigail, this isn't the time or place." "When is the time? You've never once asked about my career. You told our family I dropped out of college rather than admit I graduated from art school. And now you're still lying about what I do." One of the relatives mumbled an excuse and hurried away. The other seemed uncomfortably fascinated by the confrontation. "You're making a scene at your brother's wedding," my father said through clenched teeth. "I'm correcting your lies about my life," I countered. "There's a difference." My mother appeared as if conjured by the tension, placing her hand on my arm. "Please, Abby, not today. Don't ruin Michael's special day." The implication was clear. My standing up for myself would ruin the wedding, not my father's lies or dismissal of my achievements. Once again, keeping the peace meant I should silence myself. "Fine," I said, pulling away from her. "Enjoy the rest of the reception." I found Daniel at our table and told him I needed to leave. Without question, he gathered our things and guided me outside, hailing a cab back to our hotel. Later that night, a soft knock on our hotel room door revealed Michael's new wife, Amanda. I barely knew her, but she stood there with genuine concern on her face. "Michael told me what happened," she said. "I just wanted to say, I've seen your website. Your work is beautiful, and what you do matters. I'm sorry about your dad." That small act of recognition from someone who barely knew me but took the time to look at my work meant more than she could know. After that wedding, I limited my contact with my parents even further. Occasional text messages with my mother, Christmas cards, and a phone call on major holidays became the extent of our relationship. Michael and I maintained a cautious friendship, though he remained careful not to take sides. My career, meanwhile, began to flourish. The children's book received positive reviews, leading to more illustration contracts. I started developing my own style and building a reputation in the publishing world. Daniel and I moved to a slightly better apartment, one where the shower pressure actually worked and the upstairs neighbors didn't host weekly dance parties. When my first major illustration award arrived in the mail, a recognition from the Society of Illustrators for Emerging Talent, I took a photo and nearly sent it to my parents before stopping myself. What was I seeking? The approval I'd never receive? Instead, I framed the certificate and hung it above my desk, reminder that validation could come from within the industry I respected, not just from family who didn't understand it. The Metropolitan Museum of Art had always been our special place. Daniel and I spent countless Sundays wandering its halls, losing ourselves in centuries of creative expression. On our third anniversary, as we stood in the American wing before a massive landscape painting, Daniel dropped to one knee. "Abby," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket, "you've shown me what it means to fight for your passion. Will you keep fighting alongside me as my wife?" The ring was perfect, a simple band with a small emerald instead of a diamond. Green, my favorite color. As museum visitors applauded around us, I said yes through happy tears. That night, curled on our couch with takeout and champagne, we discussed wedding plans. The conversation inevitably turned to family. We should at least tell them, Daniel said gently. Whatever their reaction, you won't regret giving them the chance to be happy for you. The next day, I called my parents' house, heart pounding. My mother answered, her surprise at my call evident in her voice. Mom, I have news. Daniel proposed yesterday. We're engaged. Her response was a mix of genuine happiness and immediate anxiety. Oh, Abby, that's wonderful news. Daniel is such a nice young man. Have you set a date yet? Will it be in New York or Boston? How many people are you thinking? Your father and I will need to discuss. Mom, I interrupted. We haven't figured out any details yet. We just wanted to share the news. Is Dad there? The phone rustled as it changed hands. Abigail, my father's voice came through, formal as ever. Your mother tells me congratulations are in order. Yes, Daniel and I are engaged. I see. And what are his prospects now? Still drawing cartoons. I closed my eyes, counting to 3. Daniel is an art director at his gaming company. He was promoted last year. And how do you plan to afford a wedding? Those art jobs of yours can't pay much. No congratulations. No happiness. Just immediate concern about money and status. We'll manage, Dad. We're thinking of something small anyway. Small? What will people think? The Prestons had over 200 guests at their daughter's wedding last year. I don't care what the Prestons did. This is our wedding. The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with my father handing the phone back to my mother, who tried to smooth things over with promises to call me later in the week. Michael called that evening, genuinely excited about our engagement. Amanda and I are thrilled for you guys. Whatever you need for the wedding, just ask. His support meant more than he knew. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and I began planning a modest but beautiful ceremony at a converted warehouse space in Brooklyn, with about 60 guests, mostly friends and Daniel's family. We could create the intimate, artistic celebration we envisioned while staying within our budget. I had nearly convinced myself that my parents' limited involvement was for the best when Amanda called me with news that shattered that illusion. Abby, I'm not sure if I should tell you this, she began hesitantly, but it doesn't feel right to keep it from you. Tell me what? Your parents are contributing $50,000 to Michael's brother-in-law's wedding. I overheard your dad talking about it at dinner last night, saying something about maintaining family standards. The room seemed to tilt. My parents had refused to offer any financial help for my wedding, claiming they didn't believe in extravagance, yet they were happily funding a wedding for someone who wasn't even their child. Are you sure? I asked, though I knew Amanda wouldn't make this up. Yes. I'm sorry, Abby. I just thought you should know. That evening, I broke my own rule and called my parents directly, asking about this discrepancy. The resulting conversation was worse than I could have imagined. That's different, my father insisted. Amanda's family has certain connections that are valuable to maintain. And what about your own daughter's wedding? You chose to leave the family, Abigail, he said, his voice cold. When you rejected our guidance about education and career, you made it clear you didn't want our input. You can't have it both ways. I didn't reject the family. I chose a different career path. A path that embarrasses us, he shot back. Do you think I enjoy telling colleagues that my daughter draws pictures for a living while other men's daughters are becoming doctors and lawyers? My mother's voice broke in, tearful as always during conflict. Abby, please understand. Your father works hard for his money. He has the right to spend it how he sees fit. This isn't about the money, I said, though partly it was. This is about the constant message that I'm worth less than everyone else in this family. After I hung up, Daniel held me as I cried, not for the lost wedding funds, but for the final confirmation that I would never be valued equally in my family's eyes. The next day, Daniel's parents called. They had been saving for their only son's wedding for years and wanted to contribute a generous sum to help us create the day we deserved. Their kindness, freely given without judgment or conditions, highlighted everything that was missing from my own family relationship. As our wedding plans progressed, the divide between my parents and me grew wider. I sent them formal invitations, unsure if they would even attend. Their RSVP arrived 3 days before the deadline. A terse "will attend" checked on the card. Our wedding planning continued despite family tension. Daniel and I focused on creating a day that represented us, artistic, intimate, and meaningful. We found a florist who specialized in sustainable arrangements, hired a friend's jazz quartet, and designed our own invitations featuring my illustrations and Daniel's typography. Around this time, my social media presence began to evolve. I had started an Instagram account years earlier to showcase my artwork, but increasingly, I shared glimpses of my personal life too: studio spaces, Brooklyn neighborhoods, the occasional selfie with Daniel. Initially, I was hesitant to share wedding planning content. The complex emotions surrounding my family's limited involvement made me protective of the process. But after posting a photo of our handmade save-the-dates and receiving an overwhelming positive response, I began carefully documenting certain aspects of our planning journey. "Your authenticity is refreshing," one follower commented. "Most wedding content feels so staged and perfect." I hadn't considered that my transparency about creating a meaningful wedding on a budget would resonate with others. As my follower count grew, I found myself part of a community of creative professionals and individuals navigating complex family dynamics. A week before the wedding, my parents confirmed they would attend both the ceremony and reception. The rehearsal dinner, traditionally hosted by the groom's parents, became a warm, emotional event at a small Italian restaurant near our venue. Daniel's parents welcomed everyone with genuine enthusiasm, while my father sat stiffly at the table, barely speaking to Daniel or his family. My mother fluttered nervously between groups, clearly trying to compensate for my father's coldness. Michael and Amanda served as buffers, engaging Daniel's relatives in conversation when the silence from my father became too awkward. The wedding day dawned with perfect October weather. Crisp and sunny, with leaves turning golden in Brooklyn's parks. My small bridal party of Jessica and 2 art school friends helped me into my dress, a vintage-inspired gown with hand-embroidered botanical elements that I'd collaborated on with a designer friend. In the moments before the ceremony, my father and I waited in a small side room of the venue, preparing for our walk down the aisle. He looked at me for what felt like the first time in years, his expression unreadable. "You look nice," he said finally. "Thank you," I replied, smoothing my dress. "Dad, I'm glad you and Mom came today." He nodded stiffly. "You're still our daughter." It wasn't exactly a warm affirmation, but it was something. When the music began, he offered his arm and walked me down the aisle with formal correctness, handing me off to Daniel without the traditional words of blessing. The ceremony was everything we'd hoped for: personal vows that made our friends laugh and cry, readings selected from our favorite poets, and an exchange of rings under a canopy of autumn flowers. For that hour, family tension faded into the background as Daniel and I focused entirely on each other and the commitment we were making. It was during the reception that the facade cracked. My father's toast, which I'd briefly hoped might contain some word of approval or acceptance, became another public reminder of his disappointment. When Abigail was young, he began, champagne glass in hand. She was always stubborn, determined to do things her way, even when advised otherwise. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. "Her chosen path has not been what her mother and I envisioned," he continued. "But today she seems happy, and we hope that with marriage comes a new maturity and sense of responsibility." To the bride and groom, Daniel's family exchanged glances of disbelief. His father, normally laid back and jovial, looked genuinely angry. My friends, especially those who knew our history, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table as my father sat down to scattered, confused applause. Then Daniel's father stood, salvaging the moment with a heartfelt toast about creativity, partnership, and the courage to forge your own path. The contrast between the two speeches couldn't have been more stark. After the wedding, I posted a few carefully selected photos on Instagram, briefly mentioning the beautiful day without delving into family dynamics. But one of our guests had recorded the toasts and, with my permission, shared a clip comparing my father's cold speech with my father-in-law's warm one. The video unexpectedly went viral. Comments flooded in from people sharing their own experiences with parental disappointment and family estrangement. Many recognized the signs of narcissistic family dynamics or the pain of being the family scapegoat. This is exactly what my father's speech was like at my wedding. The way he made her special day about his disappointment, classic narcissism. That poor bride maintained such grace while being publicly shamed by her own father. I hadn't intended to expose our family issues so publicly, but the response revealed how many people were silently enduring similar situations. In subsequent posts, I began cautiously sharing aspects of growing up as the less favored child and how I'd built confidence in my creative career despite family disapproval. My follower count exploded, going from a few thousand to over 50,000 in a matter of weeks. Art directors and publishers discovered my work through this increased visibility, leading to new professional opportunities. But more meaningful were the messages from people who felt less alone after finding my content. "I've never told anyone how my parents treated me differently from my siblings," one woman wrote. "Seeing you talk about it so openly helps me feel less crazy for being hurt by it." The unexpected platform brought a responsibility I took seriously. Alongside my artwork, I began discussing toxic family relationships and the journey towards self-worth when parental validation is withheld. My father, predictably, was furious about the public exposure. His angry phone call came late one evening, about a month after the wedding. "You've humiliated our family online," he seethed, taking private matters and broadcasting them for attention. "I always knew you were self-centered, but this crosses a line." "I never mentioned your name," I replied. "I shared my experience, which I have every right to do. People know who we are. Your mother is devastated. Is that what you wanted?" The call ended with his threat to consider legal action if I continued defaming the family online, a threat as empty as it was telling. My father's concern, as always, was about appearances rather than addressing the actual harm that had been done. After that conversation, I made the painful but necessary decision to go low contact with my parents. Birthday cards, occasional text messages, and perhaps a visit during major holidays would be the extent of our relationship for the foreseeable future. The 2 years following our wedding brought substantial professional growth. My children's book illustration work expanded, and I published my first book as both author and illustrator, a story about a young girl finding her voice through art that was thinly veiled autobiography. Daniel received another promotion, now leading a team of artists at his gaming company. We moved into our first home, a modest but charming row house in a family-friendly Brooklyn neighborhood. Though still working through family issues in therapy, I had reached a place of relative peace about my relationship with my parents. Our contact remained minimal but civil. My mother would call every few weeks with surface-level updates about neighbors or distant relatives, carefully avoiding mention of my career or my father's opinions. I'd send holiday cards and occasional texts when I saw something that reminded me of home. My father and I spoke directly perhaps twice a year, brief, formal exchanges that revealed nothing of substance. My relationship with Michael and Amanda had actually improved with distance. They visited us in New York several times, genuinely interested in our lives and careers. When they had their first child, a daughter named Lily, I was touched that they asked me to be her godmother. The quarterly visits to see my niece became bright spots in my year. My social media community continued to grow, now centered around both my professional work and authentic discussions of family dynamics and creative resilience. The support I found there helped fill the void left by my family's conditional love. I had just returned from a successful book signing tour when I received the call that would shatter the fragile peace I'd established. "Abby," Amanda's voice sounded strange, tight with tension. "There's something you need to see. I'm sending you a screenshot right now." "I'm so sorry." "What is it? Is everyone okay?" I asked, immediately concerned about my niece. "Everyone's fine, but just look at what your dad posted on Facebook." Moments later, my phone pinged with Amanda's message. What I saw made my stomach drop and my hands shake so badly I nearly dropped my phone. My father had created a poll in a private family Facebook group, one I'd been excluded from years ago. The question was simple and devastating. If you could erase one person from the Preston family, should it be Abigail? The poll options were yes, she's abandoned family values, or give her one more chance. Beneath the poll, relatives had left comments. Some expressed shock at the question, but others engaged with it seriously, discussing my selfish choices and how I'd embarrass the family with my social media oversharing. My own aunt had written, "She's made it clear she doesn't want to be part of this family anyway." Most crushing was my mother's comment, "Robert is just trying to process his hurt. Abby doesn't understand how her choices have affected us." I searched for any defense from Michael, but found none. Whether because he hadn't seen the post yet or had chosen not to engage, I couldn't tell. The room spun as I sank onto the couch. Daniel found me there 10 minutes later when he arrived home from work, still staring at my phone, tears streaming silently down my face. "What happened?" he asked, immediately sitting beside me. When I showed him the screenshot, his face transformed with a rage I'd never seen before. "This is abuse, Abby. Clear, documented emotional abuse. From your own father." "And my mother defended him," I whispered. "And all those relatives voted and commented like this was a normal thing to discuss." Daniel took my phone gently and screenshot everything before it could be deleted. "In case you need it someday," he said. "Evidence of how you've been treated." I barely slept that night. The explicit rejection I'd always felt implicitly had been laid bare in the most public, humiliating way possible. My own father had asked our family if I should be erased from it, and people had actually voted. The pain was physical, a crushing pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. By morning, I'd cycled through shock, grief, and finally, a cold, clarifying anger. This was not something I would quietly absorb any longer. The decision to share my father's poll publicly wasn't made lightly. After consulting with my therapist and discussing it thoroughly with Daniel, I posted the screenshots to my Instagram account with a simple caption. "This is what family estrangement sometimes looks like from the inside. My father created this poll yesterday. This is why I speak about toxic family dynamics." I turned off my phone and spent the day painting, losing myself in color and line as I had since childhood when my emotions became too overwhelming. By evening, when I finally checked my notifications, the post had gone viral beyond anything I'd previously experienced. Tens of thousands of shares, hundreds of thousands of likes, and comments flooding in faster than I could read them. News outlets were sending interview requests. The hashtag #EraseFromFamily was trending as people shared their own stories of family rejection and conditional love. My father called first, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Take it down immediately," he demanded. "You have no right to share private family matters. I'm consulting with attorneys about defamation charges." "It's not defamation if it's true," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "You created that poll. You put it in writing. I'm just showing people who you really are." "You've never understood family loyalty," he hissed. "This is why you don't belong." "No, Dad. This is why I needed to leave. Send whatever lawyers you want. The truth is the truth." My mother's voicemail came next, tearful and pleading. "Abby, please remove that post. Your father is beside himself. This is tearing the family apart. Why would you do this to us?" The message crystallized everything wrong with our dynamic. My father's cruelty wasn't the problem. My response to it was. I deleted the voicemail without returning her call. Over the next few days, surprising support emerged from unexpected quarters. Several extended family members contacted me privately, apologizing for participating in the poll or for years of standing by while I was treated as less than. My cousin Jen wrote, "I always saw how differently Uncle Robert treated you, but I never said anything. I'm so sorry, Abby. That was cowardice on my part." Most significantly, Michael finally took a stand. He called me directly, his voice thick with emotion. "I just confronted Dad," he said. "Told him the poll was inexcusable and he needs to apologize to you publicly. He didn't take it well. But I want you to know I'm on your side here. I should have said something years ago." Amanda added that she'd been documenting the differential treatment she'd observed since joining the family, initially not believing Michael's assurances that it had always been this way. "It's so obvious once you start paying attention," she said. The way he lights up when talking about Michael's work, but changes the subject when your accomplishments come up. The birthday gifts, the attention, the praise, it's all so unbalanced. Their validation, after years of Michael's careful neutrality, meant more than they could know. As the story spread, I received invitations to discuss family estrangement and emotional abuse on several podcasts and even a morning television show. After careful consideration, I accepted a few opportunities, using them to speak thoughtfully about the complexity of toxic family relationships and the difficult path toward healing. Estrangement isn't something people choose lightly, I explained during one interview. It's usually the last resort after years of trying to be heard, to be valued, to be treated with basic respect. My father attempted to control the narrative through his own social media posts, claiming I was mentally unstable and had always been attention-seeking. But screenshots of his poll continued to circulate, making his denials ring hollow. The court of public opinion had firmly sided with me. Throughout this period, I continued regular sessions with my therapist, working through the complex emotions of having my private family pain become so public. The validation from strangers was healing in some ways, but disorienting in others. Your story is resonating because it's unfortunately common, my therapist observed. But remember that your healing isn't dependent on public opinion or even on your father recognizing his behavior. It's about you reclaiming your narrative and your worth. In a strange twist of fate, my children's book received renewed attention amid the controversy, climbing the bestseller lists as people discovered my work through my story. The book, about finding one's voice and worth despite discouragement, seemed to take on new meaning for adult readers who recognized their own childhood experiences in its pages. The exhaustion of being so publicly vulnerable competed with the liberation of finally having my experiences validated. After years of questioning my own perceptions, of being told I was too sensitive or making things up, having irrefutable evidence of my father's rejection was paradoxically freeing. I was no longer fighting to be believed. 1 year after the poll incident, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. My illustration career flourished, with a second children's book in production and regular commissions from major publishers. The platform I'd gained through sharing my story allowed me to advocate for others facing similar family situations. I'd established firm boundaries with my father, very limited contact, always in writing, never alone. He had eventually offered what could generously be called an apology. I regret that my actions were misinterpreted and caused you distress. Classic non-apology, my therapist noted, but the closest to accountability he was likely capable of. My relationship with my mother had evolved in surprising ways. After months of silence following the public exposure, she had reached out with a letter that showed the first real insight I'd ever seen from her. "I've started seeing a therapist," she wrote. "I'm beginning to understand how my conflict avoidance enabled your father's treatment of you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm trying to understand." Our renewed relationship was cautious, but more honest than it had ever been. We spoke twice a month, carefully rebuilding trust conversation by conversation. She had even visited us in New York, spending an afternoon looking through my portfolio and asking questions about my creative process, something she'd never done before. Michael and Amanda had become true allies and friends. My niece Lily, now 3, had her bedroom walls decorated with my illustrations and proudly told everyone her aunt was an artist. The genuine support from this portion of my family helped heal some of the wounds left by my father's rejection. Therapy continued to provide crucial insights about the generational patterns in our family. My father's own father had been similarly cold and conditionally loving, creating a blueprint my father had followed without questioning. Understanding this didn't excuse his behavior, but helped me contextualize it. The cycle of emotional neglect hadn't begun with me, but it could end with me. Perhaps most meaningful was the community that had formed around my story. The messages continued to arrive daily, people sharing their journeys towards self-worth after parental rejection, their struggles to build healthy relationships without healthy models, their decisions to maintain or cut contact with toxic family members. "Your story gave me permission to stop trying to earn my mother's approval," one woman wrote. "At 42, I'm finally living for myself. I responded to as many messages as I could, pointing people toward resources that had helped me, books on family systems, therapist directories, online support groups. The isolation that so often accompanies family estrangement was something I could help alleviate, even if I couldn't solve the underlying problems. Daniel remained my steadfast partner through it all. His unwavering support during the darkest moments had strengthened our marriage in ways that easier times might not have. "I'm proud of you," he told me often. "Not just for your success, but for your courage in breaking cycles that have probably existed in your family for generations." My father-in-law joked that he had enough dad energy for both of us, happily stepping in with fatherly advice and encouragement whenever needed. The chosen family we'd built around us, friends, colleagues, Daniel's relatives, provided the unconditional support I'd never found at home. As the media interest in my story gradually faded, I found a new sense of peace. I no longer needed my father's approval or even his understanding. I had stopped trying to translate my accomplishments into terms he might value or justify my creative career in business language he might respect. The little girl who had desperately sought her father's validation had grown into a woman who recognized her own worth. The scars remained. Family rejection leaves marks that never fully disappear, but they no longer define me. In sharing my story publicly, I had discovered purpose beyond my art. Now, alongside my illustration work, I spoke at conferences about emotional resilience and wrote essays about recognizing worth beyond family validation. The pain I had experienced became something useful, a map that might help others navigate similar terrain. My father's Facebook poll, that cruel public rejection, had ironically freed me from the last vestiges of seeking his approval. By making his conditional love so explicit, he had released me from the exhausting cycle of trying to earn what should have been freely given. Family, I'd learned, wasn't just about blood connection. It was about who showed up, who celebrated your successes, who held space for your authentic self. Sometimes those people share your DNA, and sometimes they enter your life as partners, friends, mentors, or even strangers whose stories echo your own. If you're watching this and recognizing your own family dynamics in my story, please know you're not alone. Your worth isn't determined by those who should have protected you but didn't. Healing is possible, even when reconciliation isn't. The family you build can be stronger than the family you were born into. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more conversations about family dynamics, creative resilience, and finding your voice. Share your own experiences in the comments if you feel comfortable. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Remember, the family that couldn't value you doesn't determine your worth. You're enough, exactly as you are.